They say that power does not come in a single day. It is born in the shadows, in whispers, in invisible threads that connect people's destinies. The legend of the Samsonov dynasty began in a small seaside town called Arda, where the roar of the waves was louder than the city's news and the smell of salt and fish defined each day. No one could have imagined that from here, from its narrow streets and dusty markets, would rise a clan that would one day bring an entire continent to its knees. The first known figure was Yaroslav Samsonov. His origins were wrapped in myth. Some claimed he was the son of a runaway merchant, others that he was the illegitimate child of an aristocrat from the Eastern Protectorate. But one fact was undeniable. He had a mind that refused to follow the rules. Yaroslav knew the value of words and the value of silence. He could seal a deal where others saw only quarrels, and he could spark conflict where enemies were close to peace. At the end of the 18th year of the Wei Empire's rule, when the borders of Asia were still shifting and trade routes belonged to those who could protect them, Yaroslav created a small trading post. It was only a few warehouses and a pier, but it was here that the story began, the one that would become legend centuries later. Arda lived by its own laws. Judges were corrupt, guards were slow, and gold always spoke louder than an oath. Yaroslav realized that trade could be made not only in goods, but in influence. His trading post became a meeting place for ship captains, smugglers, and diplomats. He knew how to listen to stories, and every story turned into a coin, and every coin into a new step upward. He started with spices, hot pepper from the southern islands, fragrant tea from the mountain principalities, and the rare Ziana root prized by healers. But Yaroslav quickly understood spices brought gold, but not power. And in Asia, power belonged to those who could control war and hunger. His first major move came in the year of the Great Harvest Shortage. When grain prices rose in the markets, Yaroslav was already secretly buying it up from neighboring principalities for next to nothing. By spring, when hunger swept the coast, his warehouses were full. He sold grain at 3, sometimes 4 times the usual price, but at the same time generously shared supplies with those towns where the right people held office: officials, elders, merchant leaders. In doing so, he bought not just money, but loyalty. His name became known beyond Arda. He began receiving invitations to capitals and secret councils, but with fame came enemies. In those days, the world was ruled by alliances sealed not on paper, but in blood. Yaroslav had to choose: remain a merchant or become a politician in the shadows. He chose the latter. Soon he made his first secret alliance with the Sea Order, a military guild that controlled caravans through the Eastern Strait. They received supplies from him, and he in turn gained protection and access to maps that opened new trade routes. It was then, at night, that people no one knew by face began appearing at Samsonov's house. They were called the Seven of the Mist. It was said they were advisors, but in reality, they represented 7 different powers: the church, the army, the merchant class, pirates, mercenaries, the magistrate, and dark intermediaries from the western lands. Yaroslav understood that if he wanted to hold on to power, he would have to play all the pieces at once. After the alliance with the Sea Order, Yaroslav Samsonov became a different man. He was no longer just a merchant lucky in his deals. He now looked like a player who knew that every coin was a bullet, every contract a blade, and every smile a possible strike in the back. Arda was becoming too small for him. The first rumors of his influence reached the lands of the Kuyan Steppe, a rich region through which caravans of silk and precious stones passed. These lands belonged to the Council of Nomadic Khans, people who valued strength over gold. Yaroslav realized he could not take them head on, but he could buy their thirst for power. He sent to the Khans not goods, but stories. Merchants working for him told tales of how Arda was ruled by a man who could turn a city into a fortress and streets into golden rivers. He sent them rare gifts: swords of Damascus steel, armor that no arrow could pierce, and books telling of the great conquerors of the past. It worked. The nomads began to respect his name even before he appeared at their campfires in person. When he finally arrived in Kuyan, he did not ask for trade privileges. He offered help in their war with the northern baronies. On his side came the supply of food and weapons. On theirs, the protection of all caravans traveling under the Samsonov flag. The alliance proved profitable for both parties, but it became the first step toward what would later be called the Samsonov Web, a network of agreements from which there was no escape. Returning to Arda, Yaroslav found the city changed. Local elders had begun acting on his advice, guards wore his insignia on their gloves, and in the markets, merchants whispered that opening a shop without his permission was mead. The Sea Order continued supplying him with new maps and warning him of competitor movements. but with success came new enemies. The Southern League of Port Cities saw him as a threat. These cities lived on maritime trade and tolerated no outside influence. At one of their secret councils, it was decided Samsonov had to disappear. The assassination attempt happened in the midst of the Spring Festival. Crowds of people, music, the smell of roasted meat, and then the flash of a dagger. Yaroslav survived only because one of the Seven of the Mist, a former pirate named Rodan, noticed the danger in time. The attacker was captured but died without speaking a word. This incident changed everything. Yaroslav understood that the world he had entered did not forgive mistakes. If before he merely played with the ambitions of others, now he began building his own system of control. In Arda, secret watchers appeared. In the steppes, trusted couriers. In the maritime guilds, bribed clerks. By the end of the 10th year of his rule, the trading post had become something much greater, a center where decisions were made that affected half the coastline. But Yaroslav still saw a goal before him, one more alluring than gold, to unite the trade routes of Asia under his hand. The only obstacle on that path was the Great Eastern Consortium, an alliance of the richest merchant houses whose influence stretched from mountain passes to desert caravan trails. They held the keys to the routes no ship or caravan under Samsonov's banner could yet tread. It was with them that Yaroslav decided to play his most dangerous game. The Great Eastern Consortium was not just a union of traders, it was an invisible throne occupied by the oldest dynasties of merchants, bankers, and maritime magnates. They held not only money but the minds of rulers. Their word could open or close a border, raise or destroy an entire city. When Yaroslav Samsonov first spoke of the consortium among his Seven of the Mist, silence filled the room. Even Rodan, who laughed at danger, frowned. To challenge the consortium was like challenging the sea itself, but Yaroslav had no intention of waging open war. He understood they could only be defeated from within. He began with small moves. His people secretly bought the debts of minor merchants who worked for the consortium, offering them better terms. Those who agreed found themselves in dependence on Samsonov instead. He created a network of shadow partners who on paper belonged to the consortium system, but in reality worked for him. At the same time, he launched an information war. Through his agents in coastal cities, he spread rumors that the consortium was weakening, that their captains were losing cargo at sea, that their warehouses held goods long spoiled and unsellable. The rumors eroded trust, and in trade, trust was worth more than gold. The first real blow to the consortium came with a deal with the Principality of Saigin. This was a rich but isolated mountain state whose silver mines were considered a strategic resource. For years, the consortium had held a monopoly on purchasing their silver, but Yaroslav offered the prince double the price and personal protection for the caravans. The deal was struck in secret, and when the silver began flowing to Samsonov, it was a strike against the consortium's prestige. The response was immediate. The consortium sent a fleet to blockade the ports through which Samsonov's goods traveled. Several of his ships vanished at sea, and markets began refusing his coin. But Yaroslav was ready. Through the sea order, he organized alternative routes through the northern straits where storms shattered masts, but where the enemy dared not pursue. The blockade turned into a problem for the consortium. They spent their strength guarding the seas, while in their rear, strange fires began breaking out in warehouses, cargo disappeared, and captains vanished. No one could prove Samsonov's involvement, but everyone knew whose work it was. Meanwhile, in Arda, everything was changing. On the main square, a new building was erected, the House of Councils, where people who reported directly to Yaroslav met. Officially, they governed the city. In reality, they carried out his personal will. Through them, he began dictating terms to other coastal cities. Either they joined his trade union, or they were left alone to face the will of the consortium. Gradually, the map of influence shifted. Southern markets, once under consortium control, began falling under Samsonov's authority. But Yaroslav knew he had only begun the war. The consortium had no intention of surrendering, and their response would be brutal. Soon, he received word that the consortium's elders had convened a grand council in the capital of the Golden Archipelago. There, the fate of not only their alliance, but the entire coastal world would be decided. Samsonov resolved that he had to be there, but to attend this council, he would have to do something he had never done before, step out from the role of shadow puppeteer and walk into the open arena to challenge his opponents face to face. The Golden Archipelago was the heart of trade for the entire Eastern Sea. Its capital, the city of Valena, shone with the domes of temples, the gleaming roofs of palaces, and the noise of markets where one could buy anything, from pearls from distant reefs to ancient maps drawn by the hands of vanished civilizations. It was here that the Grand Council of the Consortium had been called, a meeting to decide who would rule the seas for decades to come. Yaroslav Samsonov arrived in Vilhena not as a guest, but as a participant. Formally, he represented the trade union of Arda, but everyone knew he had come not to listen, but to change the course of events. His arrival was accompanied by whispers in the alleys and wary glances in the halls. The Grand Council was held in the Hall of Salted Winds, an ancient stone building whose windows looked directly onto the sea. At the long table sat the elders of the consortium, gray-haired trade magnates, young heirs in fine fabrics, and military commanders accustomed to the smell of gunpowder. In their eyes burned the desire to keep their power, but deep within lay the shadow of fear that Samsonov had already infiltrated their network. The council began with accusations. The consortium's representatives declared that Arda engaged in unfair trade, meddled in the affairs of other ports, and violated old agreements. They demanded that Samsonov abandon his roots and pay compensation for the damage he had caused. Yaroslav listened in silence. He knew he had not come to justify himself. When all fell quiet, he rose. His voice was calm, but it carried a threat. You speak of agreements as if they were sacred tablets, yet you are the first to break them. You plunder the seas, monopolize the caravans, and strangle cities with tributes. I offer only a path where every port is free and every merchant is protected. The elders exchanged glances. Some began whispering, others openly smirked, but Yaroslav pulled out a scroll and unrolled it. It was a map, not an ordinary one, but drawn by the Sea Order, marked with the locations of all the consortium's secret ports and warehouses. This is your true wealth, he said, and here are those who now know where it lies. The effect was explosive. The hall erupted in noise. Several magnates leapt to their feet, demanding explanations. Others tried to calm the situation. But Yaroslav went on. I have allies in the steppes, in the mountains, and on the seas. If you choose to declare war on Arda, know this. Your caravans will burn, your ships will sink, and your warehouses will be emptied. Either you accept the new rules, or you lose everything. This was not just a threat. It was the announcement of a new era, and for the first time in many years, the consortium found itself in a defensive position. That evening, in a narrow alley behind the Hall of Salted Winds, Samsonov met with a man known in Vilhena as the Gray Captain. He was one of the consortium's secret transporters, but for several months he had been secretly passing Yaroslav information about cargo movements. Everything is going according to plan, the captain said, but they have an answer. They are not going to strike your ships. They plan to hit the very heart of Arda. Yaroslav understood that the war was reaching a new level. Now it was not only about trade routes, but about the survival of his city. In that moment, he made a decision that would become key in the dynasty's history. He began preparing Operation Eastern Shadow, a vast network of sabotage, bribes, and secret agreements aimed not merely at weakening the consortium, but at seizing control of its entire structure. That night, as Yaroslav left Vilhena, fog was already thickening over the city. It was not just a whim of nature. The fog came with cold winds that brought storms. For Samsonov, it was a good sign. In his world, such omens meant that secrecy and chaos would be his allies. Operation Eastern Shadow was born in the secluded Tower of Arda, where only a narrow circle of trusted people were allowed. The seven from the mists sat around a round table, maps of the coastline before them, lists of captains and caravan routes. The plan was simple in concept, but monstrously complex in execution. 1. Infiltrate people into the consortium's key ports. Merchants, skippers, guards, each was to become Samsonov's eyes and ears. 2. Bribe scribes and treasurers. The consortium's money had to leak slowly but steadily until its internal accounts began to crack. 3. Sabotage sea routes. False navigational charts, rumors of pirate ambushes, acts of sabotage in shipyards, everything to slow their fleet. 4. Subtle work with the consortium's allies. Offer them more profit than the elders gave, and draw them into a web of obligations from which there was no escape. The first blow fell on the harbor of Tarsina, the consortium's largest port in the southern seas. On a quiet evening while the guards drowsed, a fire broke out in the shipyards. The blaze destroyed several ships under construction and the main supply warehouse. By morning, the city was buzzing that pirates were to blame, but those who knew that a squad of marine mercenaries under Radan had recently arrived in Arda understood where the disaster had truly come from. At the same time, Yaroslav began undermining the consortium's economic base. He persuaded the Prince of Saijin, with whom he already had an alliance, to stop delivering silver to consortium ports and redirect it through Arda. To amplify the effect, he sent messengers to the Kuyan steppe with an offer of mutual caravan protection. The steppe dwellers agreed, and caravans began flowing through their lands, bypassing the old routes. But the most elegant move in Eastern Shadow was the takeover of the port of Layanhi. This harbor city was famous for receiving goods from distant islands and desert oases. Samsonov bribed the city's treasurer, who altered tax collection in Arda's favor. Soon, Layanhi became effectively independent from the consortium and began passing Samsonov information about all arriving ships. 6 months after the operation began, the consortium had already lost control over 3 key ports. At the Grand Council in Vilena, arguments raged, and rumors that some hand is pulling out their heart spread faster than the caravans. But Yaroslav knew his successes would provoke a counterstrike, and he was not wrong. At the start of the new storm season, a messenger arrived in Arda with grim news. The consortium had assembled a coalition of cities and principalities ready to march on him in war. This was no longer a trade skirmish, it was a challenge of annihilation. It was then that Yaroslav made a move historians would later call madness, and his supporters would hail as a stroke of genius. He decided not to defend, but to launch a preemptive strike at the enemy's very heart, the capital of the consortium. The news that the consortium was gathering a coalition to destroy Arda was met with unease in the city, but also with that tense thrill that comes when you realize there is no turning back. Yaroslav Samsonov stood atop the tower of his residence, gazing out at the sea. Storm waves crashed against the docks, and in the harbor, the ships of the Sea Order stood ready. "We will not wait for them to come," he told the 7 from the mist. "We are going to them." The plan was bold. While the consortium's coalition gathered its forces and marched toward Arda, strike directly at the capital of the Golden Archipelago, Vilena. There, in the halls of the consortium, were kept not only their wealth, but their archives, contracts, maps, promissory notes, and the names of secret agents. If these papers fell into Samsonov's hands, he could dismantle the enemy's entire structure without long battles. The fleet set out in the fog of early morning. The ships sailed under the flags of neutral cities to deceive the watchmen. The route lay through the dangerous northeastern strait, where currents raged, but there one could bypass the consortium's main patrols. At night, under the light of the moon over Vilena, 3 merchant ships entered the port. The guards barely paid attention. Dozens of ships arrived daily in the capital, but hidden in the holds of these vessels were armed detachments. At the agreed signal, they landed silently on the pier. The city slept. Only in the upper halls of the Hall of Salted Winds were lights still burning. The elders were meeting, discussing the upcoming campaign against Arda. They did not know that at that very moment Samsonov's men were already moving through the streets. The treasury house was the first to be taken. Disguised as repair workers, the fighters slipped inside and seized control of the document vault. At the same time, in the port, Radan's group blocked every exit so that no ship could leave for help. But the main action was unfolding in the Hall of Salted Winds itself. Yaroslav entered with 24 men at his side. The elders jumped to their feet, some reaching for daggers, but he raised his hand. "Your power ended tonight. Your contracts are mine. Your allies are my allies. Your cities have already accepted the new rules." He threw a leather sack onto the table. From it spilled the seals of the consortium, symbols of authority that now belonged to him. The silence in the hall was deafening. No one uttered a word. By morning, Vilena was under Samsonov's control. He did not destroy the city. On the contrary, he declared it a free port under Arda's protection. Merchants, frightened by the war, swore loyalty to him at once. The coalition gathered against Arda collapsed without ever launching its campaign. Without Vilena, their logistics fell apart, and the fear of further strikes was too great. A year later, the map of Asia's coast looked different. Trade routes that had been under the consortium's control for centuries now flowed through cities loyal to the Samsonov dynasty. The Sea Order ensured the safety of the seas, the steppe dwellers guarded caravans on land, and in the mountains of Saijin, silver was minted for his coins. Thus began the era chroniclers would call the Age of the Web, a time when every road, every harbor, and every market was bound by invisible threads leading to a single center, Arda. Yaroslav died 20 years after these events, leaving his heirs not just wealth, but an entire continent under their control. His name passed into legend. Some spoke of him as the great unifier of Asia, others as the man who stole it from its peoples, but both agreed no one played the game of power as he did. And even centuries later, when generations had passed in Arda and new dynasties tried to build their own empires, people still whispered it all began when Samsonov struck at the heart of the consortium.